Hello everyone and welcome to Music Theory with Gim. In this installment of analyzing harmony, we're going to delve into Lovely Oasis from Kirby Mass Attack on the Nintendo DS. Before we get into any music theory, however, let's take a listen to the music. The theme is set in the tonality of C with its mode being major. Harmonically, we're dealing with two primary progressions that are pretty simple in design, but are really great examples of how you can embellish and prolong harmony. For instance, in the first four measures of the theme, we get a two-chord vamp consisting of C major 7, the 1-7, and what can be labeled as F major over G or G9 sus with no fifth. This is a type of 5-7 chord that is voiced with its root, 4th, 7th, and 9th. So all in all, we have a 1 to 5-7 back to 1. Of course, that 5-7 doesn't have a third, but still it's a 5-7 chord. And on the surface, this might seem not that interesting. It's just a 1 to 5, very common progression, right? Well, what's interesting to note here is that because of the way the chords are voiced, the only leap we hear is the motion of C descending to G in the bass. All of the other voices ascend by step to their upper neighbor tones. G ascends to A, B ascends to C, and E ascends to F. So we can kind of look at it as E minor ascending to F major, with C descending to G in the bass. These four measures act as an introduction to the theme, and they establish both the tonality and its mode. Following these four measures, we enter into the first main progression, which actually repeats the previous chords, only now in the context of an 8-measure sentence. In the second half of the 8 measures, we hear new chords forming the progression of G minor 7, A7, D major add 9, and G7. Make note that my labeling of D major with an added ninth removes the word add and simply places 9 within parentheses. The presence of these parentheses indicates that the tone is added and is not a full D major 9 chord, which would have no parentheses. And as a bonus, it takes a lot less space than using the word add. Anyways, skipping over the first two chords, we have D major, the altered 2 chord, which is used for the sake of intensifying motion to the following chord, G7, the 5-7. Because of this alteration and its use, D major can be referred to as a dominant emulation or an applied dominant, and can be relabeled as a 5 of 5. For this analysis, however, it will simply be labeled as an uppercase 2. Going back to the chords I skipped over, we have G minor 7 and A7. These chords are used to intensify motion towards D major, the altered 2. Relative to D, this emulates a minor 4-7-2 major 5-7, and what's interesting is that G is chromatically altered to be of a minor quality, and A7 is clearly embellished by its flat 13th, F, the minor third relative to D, in both the melody and the accompaniment. Both of these factors normally indicate a resolution to a minor chord, such as D minor. Yet we arrive to D major. Of course, the 2 chord is by default a minor quality chord, but it's still interesting to consider that G was chromatically altered to have a minor quality triad, elevating the expectation of a minor 2 chord when there is no intention of ever arriving to a minor 2 chord. It's a use of chromaticism that is just an extra bit of flavor, and in this case it really pays off. Anyways, before we move on and determine the structural design of this progression, let's take a look at how the voices are moving. The 7th of G minor 7 falls as expected to E, the 5th of A7. D, the fifth of G minor, descends to C sharp, the third of A7, and B flat, the third, leaps down to G, providing A7 its seventh. When A7 moves to D major at 9, G, the seventh, falls by step to F sharp, but C sharp does not resolve up to D, nor does it use elision and descend to the seventh, C. Instead, C sharp leaps down by third to A, the fifth of D major, and then lastly the highest voice E uses oblique motion, providing D major its ninth. And this ninth of D major is used in a traditional manner in that it falls by step to D, the fifth of G7. Not only does it do that, but E is actually suspended over G, forming a 6-5 suspension. D major's third, F sharp, does not resolve up like you might expect, and instead uses the process of elision, which moves F sharp directly down to F, the minor seventh of G7. All that remains is A, the fifth of D major, ascending by step to B, the third of G7. Now that we can see all the working parts of this progression, let's talk about its structural design. The structural harmony of the first four measures is C major 7, the 1-7, and F major over G, the 5 chord, is used as a prolonging neighbor chord. In the second half of the progression, the structural harmonies are D major, the altered 2, and G7, the 5-7, with G minor 7 and A7 being used to embellish the structural motion from C major to D major. So altogether we have structurally a 1-2-5 progression. Embellished by a prolonging 5 and a relative minor 4 to major 5-7. After hearing these 8 measures in full the first time, they are heard again with essentially no changes. As a result, we're going to skip past them and go to the final 4 measures, which sound a new progression of chords. In the first of these measures, we hear F major 7, the 4-7. In the second measure, however, A descends to A flat. At first, this appears to have transformed F major 7 into F minor major 7. But if we look at the end of the measure, we'll see that the note E is used as part of a 7-6 suspension, delaying the arrival of D. As a result, I view this second measure as being D half diminished over F, the altered 2 half diminished. This chromatic alteration is done to ultimately lead into the following chord, E minor 7, the 3-7. Because of this, D half diminished over F becomes a contrapuntal chord used to simply provide additional intrigue to the motion from F major 7 to E minor 7, so rather than proceed directly from one to the next, we hear voices stagger with a touch of chromaticism. With E minor 7, we hear the first change in harmonic rhythm since it moves to A7, the altered 6-7, halfway through the measure. A7 then progresses to D major with an added ninth, which then moves to G7, with each chord receiving roughly half a measure's duration. Altogether, these 4 chords create a chromatically altered 3-6-2-5 or turnaround. Looking at the progression as a whole, we can opt to relabel E minor 7 and A7 as a 2-5 relative to D major, which, unlike the previous section's progression of G minor 7 to A7, does not necessarily imply a minor quality chord being built from D. Anyways, in these 4 measures, the voices move for the most part as you probably expect. For instance, the major 7th of F major 7 descends traditionally by step to D. What you might not have expected, however, is the chromatic descent of A to A flat. Other than this, F and C, the root and 5th of F major 7, remain intact, becoming the minor 3rd and minor 7th of D half diminished over F. When D half diminished over F proceeds to E minor 7, D remains intact using oblique motion, whereas A flat and C descend to G and B in parallel motion, forming parallel thirds. And when E minor 7 proceeds to A7, G is held over using oblique motion, while B and D ascend with parallel motion to C sharp and E, forming, again, parallel thirds. And then once we arrive to A7, all of the voices move as they did in the previous section, minus the 6-5 suspension atop G7. Now that we understand the working parts of these chords, let's talk about their structural design. Doing so requires us to view them in relation to the previous 8 measures, and really in relation to the theme as a whole. The preceding section ends with a half cadence, but the expected resolution is interrupted with G7 progressing to F major 7 rather than C major 7. Following this, we hear some other new chords as well as a bit of chromaticism, but ultimately this progression leads us right back to the same half cadence formed by G7. Knowing this, we can view the final 4 measures of the theme as being an extension of the half cadence. This isn't a necessary part of the form, but it does create additional intrigue by adding a dash of variety. It also carries the benefit of ramping up the energy of the half cadence since it is initially interrupted and then fulfilled after a second try. Upon arriving to G7 this time, we hit the loop point of the theme, sending us back to the beginning, which will resolve G7 to C major 7, and then the theme repeats. So as I said earlier, the harmony we're working with is, for the most part, very simple. But again, it's really good for showing us how to embellish and prolong harmony. And it is definitely worth remembering that this entire theme is structurally just a repeating 1-2-5 progression that carries a number of embellishments. So the next time you're composing, perhaps start with something very simple and ask, what can I do to decorate this simple idea and turn it to something more complex? The perks of doing this is that you'll begin your composition sketch with a strong foundation, and you'll already have something written down, which is probably the best thing because that pretty much cancels out the terror of having a blank canvas. Anyways, with these ideas in mind as well as the rest of the analysis, let's take another listen to Lovely Oasis and then bring this episode to a close. For those of you that are patrons, you can expect to receive a PDF containing the analysis present in this episode. I do not expect to make any additional commentaries on this particular piece, but I might make a brief statement on the melody's design. Should that happen, you'll certainly gain access to it and any other commentaries that might happen. Of course, as my patrons, it is encouraged that should you have thoughts or questions regarding this analysis or the theme as a whole, reach out to me. For those of you that are not patrons but would like to support my endeavors, be certain to subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment below, and share the video as often as you can on social media platforms. If you find yourself wanting to take your support to the next level, hop on over to patreon.com/gim and consider pledging some coin. If you're not a user of Patreon or simply want to make a single financial contribution, you can do so via PayPal, the link to which can be found in the description below. These videos do take a lot of time and effort, so any support on your end is greatly appreciated. Either way, until next time, thank you for watching this episode of Music Theory with Gim.